Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartfelt and inspiring tales of love, kindness, and the unexpected twists of life. Today's story is about a young woman who makes a selfless sacrifice to save a stranger's life, not knowing that her act of compassion would lead to a love story that would change her world forever. It's a reminder that sometimes, the smallest actions can have the most profound impact. So, sit back, relax, and let's begin the journey of Emily and James. Please subscribe to the channel to start today's story with us. It was a cold, overcast afternoon in Chicago when Emily Johnson found herself in a situation that would change her life forever. She clutched her worn-out purse, the kind that had seen better days, as she hurried through the automatic doors of St. Mary's General Hospital. The sterile, fluorescent lights overhead made the long corridor look like something out of a medical drama, cold, clinical, and slightly intimidating. The sound of a distant machine beeped rhythmically, a constant reminder of the lives hanging in balance within these walls. Emily's heart raced. Her best friend, Lily, had collapsed earlier that day, suffering from severe food poisoning. Emily, who barely had enough money to make it through the month, found herself at a crossroads, torn between ensuring Lily received the care she needed and the crushing weight of financial responsibility. Emily had nothing left in savings, and her rent was due in just a few days. If she paid for Lily's treatment, she might lose her home. But the thought of doing nothing was unbearable. The nurse at the admissions desk had directed her to room 14 where Lily was being stabilized. And Emily's pulse had finally slowed to a more manageable pace. She decided to give Lily's mother some space, knowing she would be inconsolable, and instead turned her attention to the waiting area. The plastic chairs were lined against the wall, each one occupied by people who looked exhausted, anxious, and burdened by their own worries. It felt like an ocean of suffering, each person fighting their own silent battle. Emily spotted Lily's mother, quietly sobbing in a corner, and felt a pang of sympathy. But she couldn't allow herself to break down. She had to stay strong for Lily. She was just about to pull out her phone and check on her own financial situation when a loud, desperate conversation from around the corner broke her focus. "How much is the deposit for the surgery?" a male voice urgently asked. "We can't proceed without payment or insurance confirmation," a doctor replied, his voice curt but empathetic. "But he needs the operation now." The voice trembled with fear. "Please, I promise we'll pay. We just need the chance to save him." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't quite make out the conversation, but something about the desperation in the second voice, the pleading, struck her deep in her chest. It was as though the cry for help was echoing her own struggles. Curiosity overcame her as she approached the corner. There, she saw a man, eyes brimming with unshed tears, talking to a doctor. Beside him lay a younger man, unconscious on a gurney, his face obscured by bandages. Tubes were connected to him, and Emily could see the shallow rise and fall of his chest. A fragile reminder of how close he was to losing everything. The older man's voice wavered as he explained to the doctor that the younger man, who was blind from an accident, was now facing a life-threatening complication that required immediate surgery. But their insurance had lapsed, and there was no money to cover the deposit. Dr. Patel, the attending physician, appeared torn, but the hospital's policy was clear. Without payment, they couldn't proceed with the operation. The scene stirred something in Emily. It was as if the universe was testing her, forcing her to make a decision, to act, and she couldn't stand idly by. Without even thinking, she stepped forward, her voice trembling with determination. "Please," she said, startling both men, "I can pay something. Please don't let him die because of money." The older man, presumably the younger man's brother, looked at her with confusion and disbelief. Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow. Emily could feel her face flush with shame and anxiety. But she pressed on. "I don't know him, but I can pay. How much is the deposit?" Dr. Patel hesitated for a moment, then named the figure. Emily's stomach dropped when she heard it. The amount was almost identical to the money she had set aside for rent. Her entire safety net, gone in a heartbeat. But the image of that unconscious man, the bandages, the shallow breaths, she couldn't ignore it. She thought of Lily, of her own family, of all the times she had wished for a miracle when she had been in trouble. Her hands trembled as she nodded. "I'll pay. Let's not waste any time. He needs the surgery now." The older man gasped, and the gratitude in his eyes made Emily's heart ache. "But you don't even know us," he said, his voice cracking. "We can't accept your money." But Emily wasn't listening. She forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's the right thing to do. We don't have time for hesitation." Minutes later, she found herself signing forms at the billing station, surrendering what little financial security she had left. Her chest tightened with every word she signed, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. Would she make it through the month? What if she couldn't find a way to pay for rent next week? But despite the panic gnawing at her, there was another voice inside that urged her to continue. She had no buffer left, no savings, but she had done something good, something right. A life was more important than anything else. And in that moment, Emily felt a deep, visceral sense of fulfillment. The surgery was the right thing. As she sat down to wait, the man, his name turned out to be James, was whisked away to the operating room. She sank into a chair nearby, her mind whirling. What had she just done? Would it all turn out? Would the man survive? Her eyes found the hospital bill in her bag, a stark reminder of the cost she had just paid. But for now, she just had to trust that she had done the right thing. For him, for everyone who needed someone, even if she didn't have enough left for herself. Hours passed, each one dragging like an eternity. Emily couldn't shake the image of James lying on that gurney, his body so fragile, yet holding onto life. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his shallow breaths, the bandages covering his eyes. She prayed, though she wasn't sure who or what she was praying to. She just hoped that he would pull through, that she hadn't just made a huge mistake. By the time the doctor emerged from the operating room, Emily was barely holding on. Dr. Patel took off his surgical cap and gave her a nod. "He's stable," the doctor said, his voice a little strained. "He lost a lot of blood, but we stopped the internal bleeding. If everything goes well, he should pull through." Relief washed over Emily in a wave so strong it almost made her knees buckle. She let out the breath she had been holding, her hand instinctively reaching for the hospital bill in her bag. The total cost of the surgery was daunting, but she didn't care at that moment. What mattered was that James had a chance. He was going to live. As Emily sat back down in the waiting area, she realized something had shifted within her. She had acted impulsively, yes, but in doing so, she had saved a life. It was a profound feeling, like a heavy weight being lifted, replaced by something deeper, something more fulfilling than she'd ever expected. Just as she was starting to settle her mind, a nurse approached her. "Miss Johnson?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "There's someone who wants to speak with you." Before Emily could ask who it was, she was led down the corridor and into a private room. Her breath caught when she saw the man sitting in a wheelchair beside the bed, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. His posture was relaxed, but there was something about him that was intense. Even in his quietude, he was pale, but there was a softness in his face that made Emily's heart flutter, though she tried to ignore it. "Emily Johnson?" the man asked, his voice calm and warm. He extended a hand, and she took it, noting the faint tremor in his fingers. There was something oddly vulnerable about him, something she hadn't expected from the man who had just been saved by a complete stranger. "James," she stammered, I didn't expect to see you. How are you feeling?" James smiled faintly, despite the fact that his eyes were hidden from view. "Better, thanks to you," he said, his voice tinged with genuine gratitude. "The doctor said your payment allowed them to perform the surgery in time. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here." Emily felt a rush of emotions, relief, pride, but also a hint of unease. She had done something so simple, yet it had been life-changing for this man. She suddenly felt both very small and incredibly powerful, as though her actions had opened a door to something bigger than herself. You don't have to thank me, she said quickly, her voice a little shaky. Anyone would have done the same thing in my position. James shook his head, his soft smile unwavering. I doubt that, he said. You didn't just help me. You risked everything you had. You saved my life when you didn't even know who I was. You gave me a second chance. And I don't take that lightly. The weight of his words settled heavily on Emily's heart. He didn't know her. He didn't know how difficult her life had been. How every day was a struggle just to stay afloat. And yet, here he was, speaking to her like she had given him the most precious thing anyone could give. Life itself. Let me help you, James continued, his voice gentle yet firm. I want to repay you for what you did. I don't know how, but I'll find a way. Emily felt the familiar pang of discomfort. She didn't want to accept anything from him, especially not when she hadn't expected anything in return. But she knew deep down that he wasn't just offering money. He was offering something much more meaningful. He was offering his gratitude, his recognition, and perhaps, in some way, his respect. I don't need anything, really, she said, trying to smile, but her words felt hollow. Just knowing you're okay is enough. James studied her for a moment, his dark glasses giving nothing away. But his expression spoke volumes. I won't take no for an answer, he said softly, the intensity in his voice both comforting and unsettling. After a few more minutes of polite conversation, Emily reluctantly left James's room, feeling her heart heavy with emotions she couldn't quite sort through. He was so different from anyone she had ever met, gentle, yet powerful in his quiet way. As she walked back to Lily's room, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter, this strange twist of fate, had changed something inside of her. Something profound, something she didn't fully understand yet. But she knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur for Emily. She continued to juggle her part-time shifts at the diner and tutoring center, all while trying to keep her mind from spiraling into worry. Her bank account was still nearly empty, and the weight of her rent looming on the horizon pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had no safety net left. Every shift she worked, every penny she saved, felt like it barely moved her closer to stability. But even amid the exhaustion, her thoughts kept returning to James. Since their brief conversation in the hospital room, he hadn't left her mind. She'd given him something, yes, but the way he had looked at her, the raw gratitude in his voice, there was more to him than the blind man she had helped save. Emily had begun to question herself. Did she do it out of pure compassion? Or was there something else? Some deeper connection that had drawn her to him? Just as she was getting lost in these thoughts, an unexpected phone call shook her from her reverie. The number was unfamiliar, but when she picked up, the voice on the other end made her freeze. Hello, is this Emily Johnson? The woman asked politely. Yes, Emily replied, her heart pounding. Who is this? This is Sarah Porter, personal assistant to Mr. James White. The voice continued. He would like to meet with you tomorrow afternoon. Would that be possible? Emily's head spun. The same James who had just been in the hospital? The one she had helped? And who had expressed such deep gratitude? She barely managed to hold back a gasp. Yes, of course, she stammered. I'll be there. The next afternoon, Emily found herself at a quaint cafe in the city, a far cry from the familiar diner where she spent her days. The polished windows and expensive decor made her feel out of place. But the invitation had been clear. James wanted to thank her properly. She tried to steady her nerves as she was led to a private booth. When she entered, she saw him immediately. James sat there, his dark glasses still obscuring his eyes. But his presence was undeniable. He had a quiet intensity, even in his stillness, and Emily's heart fluttered in her chest. She felt a rush of emotions, nervousness, excitement, and something else she couldn't quite identify. As she approached, he turned his head slightly toward her. Sensing her presence, the air seemed to hum with anticipation. He rose carefully from his seat, using the table as guidance, and extended his hand. Emily, he said with a smile. Thank you for coming, James, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It's nice to see you again." They exchanged pleasantries, but it didn't take long for the conversation to take a more personal turn. James's voice was soft but direct. "I wanted to thank you properly. Emily, you saved my life. And I know I owe you far more than just words." Emily waved her hand, embarrassed by the attention. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would have done." She stopped herself, not wanting to sound like she was brushing him off, but unsure how to handle his sincerity. "I'm just glad you're okay." James didn't seem convinced. "I don't think you understand. You risked your own livelihood to help me. People don't do that unless they really care." His words struck Emily deeply. She had acted on instinct, but hearing him speak so openly about her sacrifice made her realize just how much her actions had meant to him. There was no easy way to respond to that. "I've arranged for the reimbursement of the hospital bill, of course," James said after a moment, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket and handing it to her. "And I want to give you more. For everything you've done." Emily hesitated, feeling a strange mix of pride and discomfort. She didn't want to appear as though she was accepting his money out of greed. But she also couldn't deny the overwhelming gratitude she felt for his generosity. Thank you," she whispered, taking the envelope, but not quite knowing what to do with it. They talked for a while longer. About their lives, their experiences, and their dreams. Emily learned that James had been blind for most of his life after a childhood accident. Despite that, he had built a life full of meaning, focusing on his philanthropic endeavors and classical piano, which he played with remarkable skill. Emily found herself fascinated by his strength and resilience. As they spoke, a spark seemed to grow between them, something unspoken but palpable. James had a gentle kindness that was rare, and Emily, for the first time in a long while, felt as though someone truly saw her for who she was, not just for what she had to offer. When the meeting finally came to an end, Emily felt torn. There was a connection between them. That much was clear. But how could someone like her, struggling to make ends meet, ever fit into James's world? A world of wealth, influence, and expectation. She wasn't sure she could handle the attention, the pressure. But one thing was certain. The feelings she had for James were real. And they were growing stronger with every passing moment. "Would you like to see me again?" James asked, his voice soft, but with an underlying intensity that made her heart race. Emily smiled, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'd like that very much." And just like that, what had started as a simple act of compassion blossomed into something deeper. Something that could change everything. In the weeks that followed, Emily and James grew closer. What had started as a simple, selfless act of kindness blossomed into a bond neither of them had expected. James, despite his wealth and the challenges of being blind, treated Emily with a gentleness that made her feel truly seen. And Emily, with her deep empathy and strength, showed James a world beyond his own. They shared laughter, quiet moments, and a deep connection that neither had anticipated. As their relationship deepened, Emily realized that love wasn't about money, status, or appearances. It was about the heart, the genuine care and connection between two people. James proved that even the most unexpected circumstances could lead to something beautiful. One day, after a quiet walk in the park, James turned to Emily, his dark glasses hiding his eyes, but his voice filled with emotion. "You've changed my life, Emily, not just by saving me that day, but by being who you are. I've never known anyone like you." Emily's heart swelled with affection. "I feel the same way about you, James. I never imagined that one simple choice would lead me here, with you." And in that moment, they both understood that life's greatest rewards often come from the most unexpected places. Their love story, born from an act of compassion, proved that love has the power to transcend boundaries, whether they are wealth, disability, or societal expectations. Together, they created a life full of meaning, love, and generosity. A life built on kindness and the deep understanding that one brave act of compassion can change everything. If this story moved you, Please subscribe to Life Stories for more heartwarming tales of courage, redemption, and unexpected love. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time.